Here Comes the Sun has become one of the most popular and treasured Beatles songs, a gateway into their music for many new fans.
Here comes the sun.
This 3-minute gem of unforgettable songwriting is also packed with intriguing anomalies, production quirks, and even a mystery. I'm going to take you on a journey through the song's creation and point out some of these surprises. As a fair warning, you can't unhear this. Here Comes the Sun kicks off the second half of the Beatles' iconic Abbey Road album, released in September 1969, the last studio album they recorded before splitting up in 1970. Unlike the vast majority of Beatles songs, Here Comes the Sun was not written by the main songwriting duo of Paul McCartney and John Lennon, but rather by George Harrison, the youngest member of the quartet, who contributed 2 memorable pieces to the Abbey Road album, an endearing love song called Something, and the effervescent Here Comes the Sun. According to his later account, George composed the song at Eric Clapton's country estate, apparently skipping a stressful business meeting to instead bask in the pleasure of a beautiful early spring day. With an acoustic guitar in hand, George translated his experience into the blissful tune we know today. The actual recording of Here Comes the Sun began on July 7, 1969, 1 week into the sessions for the future Abbey Road album. 13 takes of the basic rhythm track were committed to tape, with Paul McCartney contributing a tasteful bass guitar part, Ringo Starr delivering a dazzling, intricate performance on drums, and George handling the main sections on acoustic guitar. The only Beatle not present was John Lennon, who was recovering from a recent car accident in Scotland. After 13 takes, the band decided that the last one was the best of the bunch. On the next day, July 8th, George recorded fresh lead vocals, replacing his guide track from the previous day's session.
Here comes the sun. Doo-doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun. I say it's all right.
Paul then joined with George to add gorgeous double-tracked harmony vocals.
Here comes the sun. Doo-doo. Here comes the sun.
One of these harmonized sections might sound familiar.
Sun, sun, sun. Here it
It was likely inspired by a song called I Live for the Sun, originally by the Sunrays,
for the sun.
which became a hit in the UK in 1968 when covered by a group called Vanity Fair.
Sun, 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 sun. Sun, sun, sun. Here it comes.
While the main elements of the song were now in place, it was far from finished. A week later, on July 16th, George added a few more textures, including a harmonium and some hand claps. After a brief hiatus, production picked up again in early August. On the 6th and the 11th, George experimented with adding electric guitar, some of which survived into the final mix, and some didn't. On the parts that survived, George used a creative technique to transform the sound of his electric guitar into something almost unrecognizable. Instead of playing through a normal guitar amplifier, George used a special speaker with a rotating chamber called a Leslie, more commonly paired with an organ, as heard in many jazz and rock recordings of the era. You can hear George's unique Leslie'd guitar at various points, but it's most clear during a brief snippet at around 1:15. Interestingly, before recording Here Comes the Sun, George had experimented with this technique on a song called Badge, co-written with his friend Eric Clapton for the band Cream. George even noted on the lyrics sheet to Here Comes the Sun that this part was the, quote, son of Badge. A different electric guitar part from these August sessions didn't make it into the final mix. In 2011, this intriguing lost overdub was rediscovered during the filming of a documentary about George's life. George ultimately felt the guitar solo didn't really fit and instructed the EMI engineers to leave it out of the final mix. A few days after the electric guitar overdubs, George turned to a special ingredient that had enhanced many other Beatles songs: an orchestral arrangement. As usual, the band's multi-talented producer, George Martin, quickly whipped together a beautiful arrangement for a string and woodwind ensemble that was recorded by session musicians at EMI on August the 15th. Still, this was not enough for the so-called Quiet Beatle. With just days to go before the album was set to be mixed, George felt that his song needed one final ingredient: the fabulous and otherworldly sounds created by a new electronic instrument called the Moog. Invented by engineer Robert Moog, this groundbreaking device was the first commercially available modular synthesizer, and it had made cameo appearances on recent albums such as Strange Days by The Doors and Bookends by Simon & Garfunkel. George had first witnessed the Moog's capabilities while producing Apple artist Jackie Lomax's debut album in Los Angeles the year before. George soon ordered a custom-built unit for himself, one of the first to be delivered to the UK. Clearly enamored with the Moog's capabilities, George released an entire album filled with its sounds in early 1969 on the Beatles' short-lived experimental label Zapple. For the Abbey Road sessions, George enlisted Beatles road manager Mal Evans to transport the hefty Moog from George's home to EMI Studios, where it was set up for recording. George apparently received little guidance on how it actually worked. Nonetheless, the results of his tinkering are, in my view, sublime. The other Beatles were fascinated by the Moog too, and so it augmented a handful of other Abbey Road tracks, including Maxwell's Silver Hammer, and Because.
Love is old, love is new.
There's another little production-related quirk on the Moog in Here Comes the Sun. According to the Abbey Road Super Deluxe Edition booklet, the Moog part was recorded onto the same track that contained the woodwinds overdub from August 15th, erasing those entirely. Well, almost entirely. One tiny section of the woodwinds part survived, and it can be heard briefly after the bridge part, when the Moog isn't being played. With all of the pieces finally in place on the packed 8-track tape, the beautifully layered recording of Here Comes the Sun was finally ready to be mixed, where, of course, the anomalies continued. If you have perfect pitch or have tried to play along to the recording, you might have noticed that the key of the song is slightly sharp. For comparison, here's the original.
Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely.
And here's the final version.
Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter.
This intentional adjustment, often called varispeed, was occasionally used by the Beatles to lend a special texture to their studio recordings. Another post-production quirk in Here Comes the Sun was discovered much later. In most of the choruses, George adds, "and I say," following the second line.
Here comes the sun, I say.
But in the last chorus, George skipped it.
Here comes the sun.
Or so we thought until 2006, when Here Comes the Sun was remixed for the Cirque du Soleil musical Love. In that version, the missing line was restored and heard by fans for the very first time.
Here comes the sun, I say, it's all right.
The last piece of Here Comes the Sun post-production trivia is a bittersweet one. The day that the song was mixed, August 20th, 1969, marked the last time that all four Beatles, Paul, John, George, and Ringo, were together in the studios at EMI. The end of an unparalleled 7-year creative journey in those hallowed halls. One of their tasks on that last day together was to determine the order of songs on the album. They ultimately decided to place Here Comes the Sun as the opener on the second half of the album. A brilliant segue following one of the most intense songs in their catalog, I Want You, She's So Heavy, which ends abruptly during a swelling wave of multi-tracked guitars and electronic noise. Flip the record over, or nowadays just wait for a few seconds, and Here Comes the Sun, resetting the tone for the rest of side 2, leading into the joyful Abbey Road medley. There's a little surprise in the sequencing too, perhaps coincidental. Both sides of Abbey Road open with the same 2 words.
Here come old flat top, here comes the sun.
But that's not all. The same thing happens again 3 songs later during one of John Lennon's contributions to the medley, Sun King.
Here comes the Sun King.
There's a bit of a mystery as to which one was written first. One theory suggests that John might have actually inspired George long before the Abbey Road sessions began. The theory is based on a tape recording from the Get Back sessions in January 1969, when John was developing the riff to what would later become the opening to Sun King. While messing around, allegedly he sings Here Comes the Sun. Due to the low quality of the recording, it's very tough to make out what John's singing here, and I haven't found any other supporting evidence. Furthermore, he never repeats this phrasing, despite returning to the riff numerous times during the Get Back sessions. So I don't find this theory particularly convincing. Another theory, which I find more plausible, is that John's opening lyrics in Sun King were written after George's song as a deliberate callback, combined with some typical cheeky Lennon wordplay referencing the actual Sun King, Louis XIV. We don't know when John wrote the lyrics, but we do know that Sun King was recorded a few weeks after Here Comes the Sun. Adding to the confusion are a couple of entries in the Beatles newsletter from that summer where the 2 songs are referred to under a single title. It's also labeled this way on the tape box. Neither John nor George ever spoke about this uncanny connection, so we may never know the true origin story. A connection wouldn't be surprising, though. Sharing and emulating ideas within the group was part of the Beatles' formula all along. You can even trace a thematic line from Here Comes the Sun back to Good Day Sunshine on Revolver, or even earlier on I'll Follow the Sun, on which George played another lovely finger-picked guitar accompaniment. Origin stories aside, the impact of Here Comes the Sun cannot be overstated. Along with its Harrison counterpart on Abbey Road, Something, Here Comes the Sun marked a major turning point in George's recognition as a songwriter. Producer George Martin later commented that it was the first time that George had really come through with a brilliant composition. John and Paul were equally impressed and praised the song in many later interviews. Despite the collective admiration, Here Comes the Sun wasn't chosen by the band as a promotional single in the US or the UK. Early public reactions were not unanimously positive either. A New York Times review called George's contributions to Abbey Road mediocrity incarnate.
All these allegations true?
No.
Any criticism was pretty short-lived, and George's prowess as an independent songwriter would be confirmed the following year with his universally acclaimed triple album, All Things Must Pass. Indeed, the passage of time has been kind to Here Comes the Sun. George performed it live on a handful of memorable occasions, including at his 1971 concert for Bangladesh, and in 1976 in a gorgeous duet with another musically inclined Paul, Simon, on the American late-night TV show Saturday Night Live.
Sun, 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 here we come.
And then, of course, there's the Eric Idle version. George released a sequel of sorts called Here Comes the Moon on his self-titled album in 1979. Speaking of outer space, Carl Sagan lobbied for Here Comes the Sun to be included, among other celebrations of human achievement, on the famous gold disc aboard the exploratory spacecraft Voyager 1. But unfortunately, permission couldn't be secured in time. A different remarkable upward journey would await Here Comes the Sun decades later, rocketing to the top of digital music platforms in recent years as the most streamed Beatles song ever, and by a considerable margin. It's a bit ironic that a George Harrison song, rather than a Lennon-McCartney hit, has become the gateway into the Beatles for new generations of fans.
Here comes the sun.
It's not hard to understand why. It contains the raw ingredients of so many of their hits. Irresistible songwriting, compelling performances, and innovative studio techniques. George's experimentation with the Moog synthesizer was yet another step in the band's long history of introducing eclectic instruments into their music, from the sitar on Norwegian Wood to the mellotron on Strawberry Fields Forever. Beneath its masterful production, the message of Here Comes the Sun is timeless and universal. George wrote this anthem of optimism during a harrowing period in his life, surrounded by seemingly insurmountable personal and professional challenges. But no matter how long, cold, or lonely the winter may seem, we have to remind ourselves, like George, that the sun will come again, and
it's alright.
What do you think of Here Comes the Sun and its many anomalies? Let me know in the comments. If you'd like to support my channel further, consider becoming a YouTube member to get access to some special perks. And as always, thanks for watching.